In the previous episode, we talked about the Roman tyrant Nero and how he ruthlessly persecuted the Christians. But at the same time, under Roman rule, unrest was brewing in the province of Judea. The Roman authorities had imposed unbearably heavy taxes on the Jewish people, and together with religious oppression, it finally ignited a large-scale rebellion in Jerusalem. At that time, the Jewish king was Herod Agrippa II, a descendant of King Herod. When the uprising broke out, the situation quickly spiraled out of control, and Agrippa was forced to flee Jerusalem. The Jewish rebels seized the opportunity to occupy the entire city and even wiped out about 5,000 Roman soldiers stationed there. That, of course, enraged Rome, an empire that never tolerated defiance. Rome was famous for its iron-fisted suppression. Upon hearing the news, Nero flew into a rage and immediately appointed the seasoned general Vespasian, then nearly 60 years old, to lead 60,000 Roman troops south to crush the rebellion. His army included Syrian slingers, Arabian archers, and soldiers from allied nations. Vespasian was a shrewd and cautious commander. Instead of attacking Jerusalem head-on, he methodically captured the surrounding towns, Galilee, Bethlehem, Samaria, one after another, cutting off all support. Just as he was preparing to besiege Jerusalem, tragic news came from Rome. Nero had committed suicide. The tyrant, after years of brutal rule, had lost the loyalty of his troops and the trust of his people. In 68 CE, while fleeing from his enemies, Nero took his own life at the age of 31. With his death, the Roman Empire fell into chaos and civil war. Vespasian immediately suspended his campaign in Judea and returned to Rome to seize the throne. Indeed, he eventually became emperor. Left behind on the battlefield was his son, Titus. Titus, though young, was bold, decisive, and an exceptional strategist. After inheriting command from his father, he launched the final assault on Jerusalem. The siege that followed was one of the most brutal in ancient history. By then, Jerusalem was no longer the same city it once was. Since the grand reconstruction under King Herod the Great, it had become a fortress with 3 layers of walls and numerous strongholds. If the defenders had united, they might have resisted the Roman army for a long time. But instead, the Jewish rebels turned on one another, split into 3 factions, fighting for control even as the enemy approached. Before the Romans arrived, the city was already at war with itself. Only when Titus began his assault did they finally cease their infighting to face the common enemy. The Romans brought with them massive siege engines, catapults, battering rams, and towering siege towers. It took them 15 days just to breach the first wall, while the second remained almost impenetrable. Titus then changed tactics. He decided to surround rather than storm the city. He cut off every source of water, even poisoning the wells outside the walls, and built a massive outer barricade to starve the inhabitants into submission. It was the same cruel strategy once used by Babylon's King Nebuchadnezzar when he conquered Jerusalem centuries earlier. The Romans maintained the siege for more than 5 months. Famine spread through the city. Food ran out, and soon there were horrifying reports of cannibalism. Eventually, Jerusalem fell. Roman troops poured into the city and slaughtered its inhabitants. The Second Temple, rebuilt by Herod at enormous cost, went up in flames and was reduced to ashes. Thousands upon thousands of Jews were killed, and the temple's treasures, gold, silver, and sacred offerings, were carried off to Rome. Yet a small group of Jewish survivors managed to escape. They fled to a fortress on a lonely mountain west of the Dead Sea, Masada. Built by Herod the Great, Masada stood atop sheer cliffs, a natural fortress nearly impossible to capture. The rebels held out there for 3 years before the Romans finally broke through. But when the Romans entered, they were met with a haunting sight. All 960 defenders had taken their own lives. They chose death over slavery. Men first killed their wives and children, then drew lots to decide who would carry out the final act of mercy. Even today, every Israeli soldier visits Masada during basic training, where they take an oath: Masada shall never fall again. This tragedy was not only a wound in Jewish history, but also a fulfillment of Jesus' prophecy. Jerusalem will be surrounded by armies, and the temple will be destroyed. Not one stone will be left upon another. But the deeper meaning of this event lies beyond the ruins. It marked the great divide between Judaism and Christianity. After the temple's destruction in 70 CE, many Christians came to believe that God had withdrawn his favor from the Jewish people. They saw the covenant of salvation as now belonging to the followers of Jesus, the new Israel of faith. Centuries later, Islam would interpret the same event similarly, viewing it as a sign that divine blessing had moved on to a new faith. Thus, the siege of Jerusalem under Titus was not only one of the bloodiest episodes in the city's 3,000-year history, it was also the turning point that reshaped the destinies of three great religions. But for the Jewish people, it was only the beginning of a long and bitter exile.